The entire penthouse went silent, not because someone screamed, not because glass shattered, but because someone did the unthinkable. In the center of the marble foyer, under the massive crystal chandelier that cost more than most houses, Miss Victoria Sterling, the billionaire's famous fiancée, raised her hand high and sharp, ready to slap another staff member like she always did. Everyone froze. The caterers arranged champagne glasses, the housekeepers folding napkins, and the security guards near the elevator. Even Mrs. Martha Chen, the head housekeeper who had seen everything in 20 years, stopped breathing for a moment. They all knew what was coming. Victoria always hit someone when she was angry, and today she was very angry. Charles's late mother's $400,000 diamond necklace had gone missing, and someone had to pay. But something strange happened. A hand caught her wrist, not softly, not fearfully, but firmly like iron wrapped in silk. It was the new maid, Sarah Mitchell, a quiet woman, a woman who started only 3 weeks ago, a woman nobody expected to even speak above a whisper, much less grab the hand of Manhattan's most feared socialite in front of 60 witnesses. But here she was, holding Victoria's raised hand in midair, refusing to let it fall. Every person in that room gasped. "What? What do you think you're doing?" Victoria shouted, her voice shaking with shock and rage. But Sarah didn't let go. Her hand stayed strong, her face stayed calm, her dark eyes never blinked. That moment, that single moment, would unravel a 3-year-old murder, expose a judge's darkest secret, and save a billionaire's life. Pause for 2 seconds and help me do something fun. Comment your city and country. I want to see how global this community really is, and I'm looking for the 2 viewers watching the farthest apart today so I can pin the winners. Now, back to the story, because what Sarah discovered during her 3rd week is about to expose everything. 3 weeks earlier, Victoria Sterling stood in the main hall of Mount Sinai Children's Hospital, surrounded by cameras and reporters and people who thought they knew her. She wore white, pure white. A silk dress that cost $12,000 but looked simple, almost humble. Her hair was pulled back. Her makeup was soft. She held the hand of a little girl with leukemia, a girl named Sophia, who had no idea that the woman kneeling beside her hospital bed was the same woman who screamed at her housekeepers until they cried. Victoria smiled, the kind of smile that made people believe in goodness, the kind of smile that got her on magazine covers. She looked at the camera and said the words she always said. "These children deserve every chance at life, every single one. And if my family's foundation can help even one child, then everything we do is worth it." The reporters loved it. The hospital director loved it. Charles Smith, standing in the back of the room watching his fiancée, loved it too. He saw a woman who cared, a woman who gave, a woman who wrote a check for $500,000 without blinking, without asking for anything in return except the chance to make a difference. He saw the woman he wanted to marry, the woman he thought could help him heal after losing his mother, the woman who understood charity and legacy and responsibility. What he didn't see was the way Victoria's smile disappeared the second the cameras turned off. What he didn't see was the way she pulled her hand away from little Sophia and whispered to her assistant, "Get me sanitizer. Now." I don't know what that child has. That same night, back at the Tribeca penthouse, Victoria stood in the kitchen screaming at a young housekeeper named Maria. Maria was 19. She'd been working there for 6 months. She was scared. She was shaking. And she was holding a thermometer in one hand and a carton of oat milk in the other. 38 degrees, Maria said quietly, her voice trembling. "You asked for 38 degrees, Miss Sterling. I checked it 3 times. But Victoria didn't care. She grabbed the carton, felt it with her hand, and threw it across the kitchen. The milk exploded against the wall, white liquid dripping down the custom Italian tile that cost more than Maria made in a year. "It's too warm," Victoria hissed. "I can feel it. Are you stupid? Are you trying to ruin my morning?" Maria opened her mouth to apologize, but before she could speak, Victoria picked up the Hermes ashtray from the counter. Heavy, expensive, orange and gold, and she threw it, hard. It missed Maria's head by inches and shattered against the cabinet behind her. Mrs. Martha Chen ran into the kitchen, her face pale. She had heard the crash from the hallway. She saw the milk on the walls. She saw Maria crying. she saw Victoria's face, cold and satisfied. "Miss Sterling, please." Martha said, her voice steady but her hands shaking. "Maria is new. She's learning. I'll take care of the milk. I'll get you a fresh carton. Please just go rest." But Victoria turned to Mrs. Martha with that same smile she used at the hospital, that perfect, beautiful, poisonous smile. "You're all so lucky I allow you to breathe my air," she said softly. Then she walked out of the kitchen, her heels clicking on the marble floor, leaving Maria sobbing and Mrs. Martha cleaning up the mess like she always did. 2 days later, Victoria fired another housekeeper. Her name was Christine. She was 42. She had worked for Charles's mother for 15 years. She had a daughter, 10 years old, who loved to draw. One afternoon, while Christine was cleaning the library, her daughter came to pick her up after school. The little girl saw Victoria in the hallway and got excited. She ran up to her with a notebook and a pen. "Miss Sterling," the little girl said, her eyes wide with admiration, "can I have your autograph? My mom says you help sick kids. I want to help people too when I grow up." Victoria stared at the child. She didn't smile. She didn't bend down. She looked at Christine and said one sentence: "Control your child or find another job." Christine tried to apologize. She tried to explain. But Victoria didn't listen. She called Charles that evening and told him Christine had been inappropriate and invasive and made her feel unsafe in her own home. Charles, who trusted Victoria completely, who believed every word she said, fired Christine the next morning. Christine lost her apartment 3 weeks later. Her daughter stopped drawing. Subscribe now and stay to the end, because I'm going to show you the one detail Emma wrote in her diary that prosecutors used to break through wealthy defendants' defenses, and you will not unsee it once I point it out. It's not what she wrote, it's how she wrote it, and that documentation strategy is why Victoria couldn't escape. This is Exposure, and we're about to break down exactly how Emma built an unbreakable case from beyond the grave. Sarah Mitchell didn't want the job. She told Mrs. Martha no 3 times before she finally said yes. It wasn't the work that scared her. Sarah had cleaned houses before. She had worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, ever since she left her husband 2 years ago with nothing but a suitcase and her 6-year-old daughter, Lily. What scared her was the address: Tribeca, Manhattan. The kind of place where people had more money than Sarah would see in 10 lifetimes. The kind of place where she didn't belong. But Mrs. Martha begged. She called Sarah 5 times in 1 week. She said she needed someone she could trust, someone smart, someone who wouldn't break under pressure. "Please, Sarah," Mrs. Martha said on that last phone call. "I knew your grandmother. I watched you grow up. You're the only one I can ask. Victoria Sterling is not an easy woman to work for, but Mr. Smith is a good man. He needs people around him who actually care. Please, just try it for a month." So Sarah said yes, and on her first day, walking into that penthouse with its marble floors and its crystal chandeliers and its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River, Sarah told herself to keep her head down. Do the work. Get paid. Go home to Lily. Don't ask questions. Don't make waves. Don't get involved. But Sarah had never been good at not noticing things. It was a skill she learned the hard way. When you live with someone who hurts you, someone who controls you, someone who smiles in public and screams in private, you learn to watch. You learn to read faces. You learn to see the signs before the storm hits. And within 3 days of working in that penthouse, Sarah saw the signs everywhere. She noticed the way Victoria's mood could change in seconds, happy one moment, screaming the next. She noticed the way Victoria watched Charles when he wasn't looking. Not with love, with something else, something calculating. She noticed the way Victoria always stood close when Charles took his medication, the way she handed him his water. The way she smiled when he said he felt tired, when he said he couldn't think straight, when he said maybe he was working too hard. Sarah noticed the locked study, the one room in the entire penthouse that Victoria told everyone to stay out of. "That's my private office," Victoria said on Sarah's second day, her voice sweet but her eyes cold. "No one cleans in there but me, understand?" Sarah nodded, but she didn't understand. Why would someone lock a study in their own home? What was in there that no one else could see? On day 7, Sarah found the camera. She was changing into her uniform in the small staff room near the kitchen, and something caught her eye. A tiny black dot in the corner of the ceiling, barely visible, hidden behind the smoke detector. Sarah stared at it. Her heart started beating faster. She knew what it was. Her ex-husband had put cameras in their apartment, in the bedroom, in the bathroom. In places Sarah thought were private. He said it was for safety, but it wasn't for safety. It was for control. And now, standing in the staff room, Sarah felt that same sick feeling in her stomach. Someone was watching. She didn't say anything. She finished changing. She walked out. But that night, when she got home to her small apartment in Queens, she pulled out a notebook. The same notebook she used when she was studying psychology at community college before she ran out of money. And she started writing. Day 7. Camera in staff changing room. Hidden. Why? Day 9. Victoria yelled at Mrs. Martha for 20 minutes because a towel was folded wrong. Mrs. Martha didn't argue, just apologized. Everyone here is scared. Day 12. Watched Victoria hand Charles his evening pills. She stood too close, watched him swallow. He said he felt dizzy. She smiled. Day 15. The locked study, still locked. What's inside? Day 18. This morning I cleaned Mr. Smith's bathroom while he was at work. Victoria came in, said she was just checking, but I saw her. She moved his medication bottles, switched 2 of them. Why? Why would someone do that? Day 19. Found a locked closet in the back hallway. Victoria said it's just storage, told me not to bother with it. But why would storage need a lock? And why did her face change when I asked about the key? Sarah closed the notebook. She looked at the words she had written, and she knew. She didn't know exactly what Victoria was doing, not yet. But she knew the pattern. She had lived this pattern before. This was control. This was abuse. This was danger. And nobody else in that house could see it because they were too scared, too tired, too focused on keeping their jobs. But Sarah saw it. And Sarah Mitchell, who had survived her own nightmare, who had learned to recognize monsters even when they wore beautiful smiles, decided she wasn't going to stay quiet this time. The day of the gala started wrong. Sarah knew it the moment she walked into the penthouse that morning and saw Victoria's face. Something had happened. Something bad. The entire staff was gathered in the main foyer, standing in a line like soldiers waiting for inspection. Mrs. Martha stood at the front, her face pale and tight. The other housekeepers looked at the floor. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. And then Victoria walked down the grand staircase, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than Sarah's car, and in her hand she held an empty velvet box. "My necklace is missing," Victoria said, her voice calm but cold, like ice cracking under pressure. "Charles's mother's diamond necklace, the one she left for our wedding, $400,000, a family heirloom, and someone in this room took it." Sarah's heart started beating faster. She didn't take anything. She never took anything. But she had seen this before. Not here, not in this house, but she had seen it in her old life, with her ex-husband, the accusations, the interrogations, the way innocent people got punished just because someone needed to hurt somebody. Victoria walked slowly down the line of staff members. She stopped in front of the first housekeeper, a woman named Rosa who had been working there for 2 years. "Empty your pockets," Victoria said. Rosa did. Nothing. Victoria moved to the next person, then the next. Each time she made them empty their pockets, open their bags, show her everything. Each time she found nothing. But she didn't stop. She didn't apologize. She just kept moving down the line, her heels clicking on the marble floor like a countdown. In the next room, Sarah could hear the caterers setting up for the gala, the sound of champagne glasses clinking, the sound of silver trays being arranged, the sound of normal life continuing while this nightmare unfolded. Tick, tick, tick. The grandfather clock in the corner kept time. Each second felt longer than the last. Victoria got to Mrs. Martha. "You've been here 20 years, Victoria said, her voice soft, almost kind. "You knew Charles's mother. You knew how much this necklace meant to her. She wore it at her own wedding, and now it's gone, right before mine. Do you know anything about this, Martha?" Mrs. Martha's hands were shaking, but her voice stayed steady. "No, Miss Sterling. I would never touch Mrs. Smith's jewelry. You know that." Victoria stared at her for a long moment, then she moved on. And then she got to Sarah, the new girl, the one who had only been there 3 weeks, the one who, just yesterday, had done something nobody else in that house had ever done. Sarah had looked Victoria in the eye. It happened during breakfast service. Victoria was yelling at one of the younger maids for putting the wrong jam on the table. She was screaming, her face red, her voice echoing through the penthouse, and Sarah, walking past with a tray of dishes, stopped. She didn't say anything. She didn't interrupt. But she looked at Victoria, really looked at her, for just 2 seconds. And Victoria saw it. That look, that quiet resistance, that refusal to be afraid. And now, standing in front of Sarah with that empty velvet box, Victoria smiled. "Sarah," Victoria said, and her voice dropped to a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than all the screaming. "You're new here. You don't know the rules yet. You don't know how things work. So let me explain something to you." She stepped closer, so close Sarah could smell her perfume, expensive, suffocating. "You know what happens to thieves in my house, Sarah?" Victoria whispered. "They disappear." Mrs. Martha's face went white, because Mrs. Martha knew. She knew what happened to the last person Victoria accused of stealing. A young woman named Emma Rodriguez, a woman who died 3 years ago, a woman whose death was called an accident. But Mrs. Martha knew the truth. And now, watching Victoria corner Sarah, watching that same cold smile, watching history about to repeat itself, Mrs. Martha felt her heart breaking. Because she couldn't stop it. Nobody could stop Victoria Sterling. Nobody ever had. Real quick, pause and drop a comment below. Tell me if you've ever been in a situation where you knew something was wrong but were told to stay silent, or where you witnessed someone abusing their power. Share your thoughts, because this community is built on people who refuse to look away. The guests were arriving. Sarah could hear them in the entrance hall, their voices bright and cheerful. Talking about the weather and the stock market and who was wearing what designer dress. The caterers were ready. The champagne was chilled. The penthouse looked perfect. Everything was in place for Victoria Sterling's charity gala. Everything except Victoria herself. She was still standing in the foyer, still staring at Sarah, still holding that empty velvet box. And she was done being patient. "You will empty your pockets," Victoria said, her voice rising. "You will show me everything in your bag, and if I find my necklace, I will have you arrested. Do you understand me?" Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, Victoria saw something in Sarah's face, that same look from yesterday, that quiet defiance, that refusal to bow. And something inside Victoria snapped. She didn't think. She just moved. Her hand shot up, fast and sharp, aimed at Sarah's face, the same way she had slapped Rosa last month, the same way she had slapped the chef before that, the same way she always did when someone dared to challenge her, even silently. But this time, something different happened. Sarah's hand came up faster, her fingers wrapped around Victoria's wrist, firm and strong, stopping the slap in midair. And suddenly, the entire penthouse went silent. Not because someone screamed, not because glass shattered, but because someone did the unthinkable. A maid had just grabbed Victoria Sterling's hand, in front of everyone. Mrs. Martha gasped, the other staff members froze, and in the entrance hall, the guests who had just walked in stopped talking. They turned. They stared. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Victoria's face went from shock to rage in less than a second. "What do you think you're doing?" she shouted, her voice shaking. "Let go of me. Let go right now." But Sarah didn't let go. Her hand stayed firm. Her face stayed calm. Her dark eyes looked straight into Victoria's, and for the first time in 3 years, Victoria Sterling felt something she had never felt before in this house. Fear. Not fear of being hurt, fear of being seen. Because everyone was watching. Everyone could see her losing control. Everyone could see the perfect mask cracking. And then a voice came from the hallway. "Victoria?" It was Charles. He had been in the kitchen checking on the caterers. He heard the shouting. He came to see what was wrong. And now he stood there, staring at his fiancée, at her raised hand, at the young maid holding her wrist. And he couldn't understand what he was seeing. His voice wasn't angry. It was confused, quiet, almost sad. "Victoria, what's happening?" Victoria turned to look at him, and in that moment, she realized what she had done. She had lost control. In public. In front of Charles. In front of the guests. In front of people who mattered. Her carefully built image, the one she had spent years perfecting, the one that made people see her as graceful and kind and perfect, had just shattered like porcelain dropped on marble. She tried to pull her hand away from Sarah, but Sarah's grip didn't move. Victoria pulled harder. Still nothing. Her face turned red. Her breathing got faster. She looked around at the staff, at Mrs. Martha, at the guests watching from the entrance hall, and she saw it in their faces. They weren't looking at her with respect anymore. They were looking at her with something else, recognition, understanding. They were finally seeing who she really was, and standing in the corner, partially hidden behind the marble column, was Victoria's father, Judge Robert Sterling. He was supposed to arrive later, but he came early. He wanted to see his daughter before the gala started, and now he stood there, watching his daughter's hand trapped in the air, watching her struggle, watching her lose control, and his face went pale. Because he had seen this before. 3 years ago. Another party. Another young woman. Another raised hand. And Judge Robert Sterling, who had spent his entire career upholding justice, who had sent criminals to prison, who had sworn an oath to protect the innocent, knew in that moment that he had failed. He had protected the wrong person, and now it was happening again. If you're invested in this story, you need to subscribe right now, because at the end of this video I'm revealing the specific documentation method Emma used in her diary that made it impossible for Victoria's lawyers to dismiss the evidence. There's a reason prosecutors could use a 3-year-old diary in court, and when I show you Emma's system at the end, you'll understand why documentation defeats denial every single time. Trust me, the method is worth it. Judge Robert Sterling moved fast for a man who was dying. Nobody knew about the cancer yet, not Victoria, not Charles. Only his doctor and the hospice nurse who came twice a week. 6 months, they said, maybe less. And for 3 years, Judge Sterling had told himself he would take his secret to the grave. He would protect his daughter. He would keep the family name clean. But watching Victoria try to slap that young maid, watching her lose control the exact same way she had 3 years ago, something inside him finally broke. He couldn't do it anymore. He couldn't protect her. Not again. So he walked across the foyer, past the shocked guests, past his daughter who was still trying to free her hand from Sarah's grip, and he put his hand on Charles's shoulder. "We need to talk," the judge said quietly. "Right now, in private." Charles looked confused, but he nodded. The two men walked into the study, the one room in the penthouse that Victoria kept locked. But Charles had a key. He always had a key. He just never used it because Victoria asked him not to. He opened the door. They went inside. The judge closed the door behind them. And for a moment, neither man spoke. Charles stood by the window, looking out at the city, waiting. And Judge Robert Sterling, who had served on the federal bench for 30 years, who had sent murderers to prison, who had sworn an oath to uphold justice, felt his hands start to shake. "There was another girl," the judge said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 years ago. Her name was Emma Rodriguez. Charles turned around. "What are you talking about?" The judge sat down in one of the leather chairs. He suddenly looked very old, very tired. "She worked here, in this penthouse. She was a maid, 24 years old, from Guatemala. She was saving money to bring her mother to America for medical treatment, diabetes. Her mother needed surgery." The judge paused. He looked at his hands. "Victoria killed her." The words hung in the air like smoke. Charles couldn't move, couldn't breathe. "What?" he whispered. No, that's not possible. I would have known. I would have—" "You were traveling," the judge interrupted. "You were in Singapore for that tech conference, 3 weeks. You weren't here. It happened during one of Victoria's charity events, a small gathering, maybe 30 people. Emma was working that night. Victoria had asked her to stay late to work overtime, but Emma said no. She had another job. She needed to leave. Victoria didn't like that answer." The judge's voice started to shake. "So Victoria went into Emma's locker. She found Emma's medication. Emma had severe allergies, peanuts, shellfish. She carried 2 EpiPens everywhere, and Victoria, my daughter, thought it would be funny to switch the labels on Emma's medications. She switched her allergy pills with her vitamins. She said later it was just a joke, just a harmless prank. Charles felt sick. "What happened?" he asked, even though part of him didn't want to know. The judge closed his eyes. The caterers that night served shrimp. Emma didn't know. She thought she had taken her allergy medication that morning, but she hadn't. She had taken vitamins. So when she ate one small piece of shrimp, her throat started to close. She couldn't breathe. She collapsed in the kitchen, and Victoria had already taken Emma's EpiPens from her bag earlier that day. Said she needed to check the expiration dates. Emma had nothing to save herself with, and Victoria, instead of calling 911 immediately, waited. She waited 12 minutes. 12 minutes, Charles. Because she was busy with her guests, because she didn't want to ruin her party, because she didn't think a maid's life was worth the embarrassment. Charles backed away until he hit the wall. "No," he said. "No, Victoria wouldn't. She couldn't." But the judge kept talking. By the time someone finally called 911, it was too late. Emma died in the ambulance, and I used my connections. I called people I knew in the medical examiner's office. I called people in the police department. I made sure it was classified as an accidental death, tragic allergic reaction, no investigation, no questions. I told myself I was protecting my daughter. I told myself it was an accident, a mistake. But it wasn't. His voice broke. It wasn't an accident, and I knew it, and I covered it up anyway. I gave Victoria permission to do it again. And now, watching her try to hurt another young woman, I see that's exactly what's happening. She's doing it again. And I can't die knowing I let it happen twice. When Detective Greenhills arrests her, I'm turning myself in too. I'll confess to obstruction of justice. I'll face whatever consequences come. It's the only way I can make this right. The security buzzer cut through the judge's confession like a knife. Charles jumped. The judge stopped talking. Both men turned to look at the intercom panel on the wall. It buzzed again, loud, insistent. Someone was at the gate downstairs, someone who wasn't going away. Charles walked over and pressed the button. "Yes?" he said, his voice shaky. The security guard's voice came through, nervous and uncertain. "Mr. Smith, I'm sorry to interrupt. But there's a detective here. He has a warrant. He's asking to come up. He says it's urgent." Charles looked at the judge. The judge's face had gone completely white. "Let him up," Charles said quietly. He didn't know why he said it. He just knew that something was happening, something that had been building for 3 years, and there was no stopping it now. On the security monitor in the corner of the study, Charles could see the front gate opening. A black sedan pulled through. A man stepped out, tall, dark suit, badge clipped to his belt. He moved with purpose, like someone who had been waiting a long time for this moment. Charles pressed the intercom again. "Who is he?" he asked the guard. "Detective Samuel Greenhills, sir," the guard replied. "NYPD Cold Case Unit. He says he's here about Victoria Sterling." Charles felt his chest tighten. Cold Case Unit. That meant old crimes, unsolved crimes, dead bodies. He looked at Judge Sterling, and suddenly everything the judge had just told him felt real. Too real. Emma Rodriguez, the girl who died, the girl Victoria killed, and now her brother was here. Back in the foyer, Victoria had finally managed to pull her hand away from Sarah. She stood there, breathing hard, her perfect hair slightly messed, her perfect composure completely shattered. The guests were whispering. Mrs. Martha was trying to calm the other staff members, and then one of the security guards came running in. "Miss Sterling," he said out of breath, "there's a detective coming up. He has a warrant. He's asking for you." Victoria's face drained of all color. For just a second, she looked terrified. Then she pulled herself together. She straightened her dress. She fixed her hair. She put the mask back on. "I don't know what this is about," she said loudly, her voice steady, meant for the guests to hear. "But I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Everyone, please enjoy the champagne. I'll handle this." But Mrs. Martha knew. She knew exactly what this was about, because during Sarah's 3rd week, Sarah had come to her with something she found while cleaning. A locked closet in the back hallway. A closet that Victoria said was just storage, but Sarah had found the key. And inside that closet, hidden behind old boxes and forgotten furniture, Sarah had found a bag, a small duffel bag with a name tag. Emma Rodriguez. Inside the bag were Emma's things, her uniform, her notebook, and a small brass key taped to the bottom with a note in Emma's handwriting that said, "My insurance, hidden where she keeps her secrets." Sarah brought the key to Mrs. Martha. Together, they realized it fit the locked panel in Victoria's desk, the one in her private study. And when they opened it, they found Emma's diary. Everything Victoria should have returned to Emma's family 3 years ago, but didn't. Everything Victoria kept, thinking no one would ever find it. And Mrs. Martha, who had loved Emma like a daughter, who had blamed herself for not protecting her, who had lived with guilt for 3 years, finally made a choice. She called the number Emma's brother had left with her years ago, the number he made her promise to call if she ever found anything, and she told him everything. She told him about the bag, about the key, about the diary, about the new maid who was asking questions, about Victoria's violence, and Detective Samuel Greenhills, who had never stopped looking for answers, who had never believed his sister's death was an accident, finally had what he needed: a witness, evidence, and a warrant. The elevator doors opened. Samuel stepped into the penthouse. He wasn't rushed. He wasn't angry. He was calm, professional. He had recused himself from the arrest team, which is why 2 other detectives stood behind him, but as the lead investigator for 3 years, he had earned the right to be here when it happened. He had waited 3 years for this. He could wait 3 more minutes. His eyes scanned the room, the chandelier, the marble floors, the expensive art on the walls, the rich people in their expensive clothes holding their expensive champagne. And then his eyes found Victoria. She was standing in the center of the foyer, trying to look confident, trying to look innocent. But Samuel knew that look. He had seen it 1,000 times, the look of someone who thought money could buy their way out of anything. The look of someone who had never faced real consequences. Until now. If you're still watching, you're exactly the kind of person this channel was built for, so hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode. Because this exact pattern of wealthy people abusing power and getting away with it shows up in another Manhattan case I'm covering soon. And the pattern recognition skills Sarah uses here become even more important in that story. Samuel pulled the warrant from his jacket pocket and held it up. "Victoria Sterling," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I'm Detective Samuel Greenhills, NYPD Cold Case Unit. I have a warrant to search these premises and to question you regarding the death of Emma Rodriguez 3 years ago." Victoria laughed. It was a sharp, brittle sound that echoed through the foyer. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, looking around at the guests, at Charles, at her father, trying to make them see how ridiculous this was. "Emma Rodriguez? I barely remember her. She was a maid who worked here years ago. She had an allergic reaction. It was tragic. But it was an accident. Everyone knows that. This is harassment. This is—" "No." Mrs. Martha's voice cut through Victoria's words like a blade. Everyone turned to look at the old housekeeper. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was strong, stronger than it had been in 3 years. "It wasn't an accident, and you know it wasn't. We all know." Victoria's face changed. The mask slipped for just a second. "Martha, you don't know what you're saying. You're confused. But Mrs. Martha stepped forward. "Sarah found Emma's diary," she said, "during her 3rd week here, hidden in your study, behind the panel in your desk, the one you thought nobody knew about. Emma wrote everything down, everything you did to her, and I called Detective Greenhills. I told him to come, because I should have done it 3 years ago." The room went completely silent. Samuel looked at Mrs. Martha, then at Sarah. "Do you have it?" he asked. Sarah nodded. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small brown leather notebook, worn, stained, with a name written on the cover, Emma Rodriguez. Samuel took it carefully, like it was made of glass. He opened it to a page he had already marked, a page Mrs. Martha had read to him over the phone. And then, standing in the middle of that expensive penthouse, in front of all those rich people in their designer clothes, Detective Samuel Greenhills began to read his dead sister's words out loud. "September 15th. Miss Victoria yelled at me today because I asked for Sunday off. My mother's surgery is scheduled, and I wanted to call her. But Miss Victoria said I'm selfish. She said if I cared about my job, I would work every day she tells me to. I'm scared to ask for anything now." Samuel's voice didn't shake, but his jaw was tight. He turned the page. "October 3rd. Miss Victoria changed my schedule again without telling me. Then she screamed at me for being late. She does this on purpose. I know she does. She wants me to fail. She wants an excuse to hurt me. Victoria started to speak, but Samuel held up his hand. I'm not finished, he said. He turned to another page. November 20th. Something terrible happened today. I refused to work overtime because I had my other job. Miss Victoria got angry. Really angry. When I came back the next morning, I found my locker open. My medications were moved. The labels looked wrong. I think she switched them. I think she touched my allergy medicine. I'm going to buy new ones. I'm scared. I don't know what she's planning, but I know it's something bad. The guests started whispering. Some of them looked uncomfortable. Some of them looked horrified. Victoria's face was getting redder. Her breathing was getting faster. This is ridiculous, she said, her voice rising. That could be anyone's diary. That could be fake. You can't. Samuel read the last entry. His voice finally broke. December 7th. Tonight is Miss Victoria's charity party. She asked me to work late. I said yes because I need the money. But I'm scared. She's been watching me all week, smiling at me. It's not a nice smile. It's the smile she has before something bad happens. If anything happens to me, if I don't come home, please tell Samuel I love him. Tell him I tried to be careful. Tell him not to let her get away with it. Samuel closed the diary. He looked at Victoria. She died that night, he said quietly. And you let her. Victoria's breathing got faster. Too fast. Her chest was heaving. Her face had gone from red to white. She looked around the room at all the faces staring at her. The guests, the staff, Detective Greenhill's holding Emma's diary. Her father standing in the doorway of the study, looking at her with something that might have been grief. And Charles. Charles, who was staring at her like he had never seen her before, like she was a stranger. I can't, Victoria whispered. I can't breathe. I can't. And then her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed. She fell hard, her body hitting the marble floor with a sound that made everyone gasp. Mrs. Martha ran forward. One of the guests, a doctor, pushed through the crowd. But before anyone could reach her, something else happened. Victoria's phone, which had been in her hand, slid across the marble floor. It spun once, twice, and stopped right in front of Charles's feet. The screen was unlocked, open to the voice memos app. At the top of the list was a file labeled Insurance Marcus Plan. Charles stared at it for a long moment. Then, with shaking hands, he bent down, picked up the phone, and pressed play. Victoria's voice filled the room. Marcus, it's me. I'm recording this just in case. Insurance. Victoria's voice sounded different on the recording. Casual, cold, amused. So the plan is working perfectly. Charles has no idea. The sedatives you got me are genius. I've been putting them in his evening pills for 3 months now, just a little bit at a time. Enough to make him tired, confused, dependent. He thinks he's just stressed from work. He thinks he's grieving his mother. It's actually kind of pathetic how easy he is to manipulate. He's so desperate for affection after she died. So grateful when I'm nice to him. It's almost boring. Charles stood frozen. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't look away from the phone. Around him, the entire room had gone silent. Everyone was listening. The guests, the staff, Detective Greenhill's, Judge Sterling. Even Victoria, lying unconscious on the floor, couldn't stop her own voice from condemning her. The next phase starts soon, the recording continued. I'm going to increase the dosage, make him really sick. Then we'll get the new will signed while he's in the hospital. While he's too out of it to read what he's signing. And then, after everything transfers to me, we stage the accident. Make it look like he fell. Or maybe a heart attack, something clean, something that won't raise questions. And then you and I split $2.3 billion, and we finally get to be together without hiding. Someone in the crowd gasped. Charles felt his knees go weak. He had to put his hand against the wall to stay standing. Victoria's voice kept talking. I already bribed that executive at Cybertech, the one who's competing with Smith Innovations for the government contract. He's going to leak Charles's security protocols next week. It'll tank the company's reputation. Charles will be devastated. And that's when I'll be there. The supportive fiancé, helping him through his crisis, helping him make decisions, helping him sign papers he doesn't understand. God, he trusts me so much. It's almost sad. Almost, she laughed. a cold, cruel laugh that made Charles's stomach turn. His mother would be so disappointed in him, letting himself get played like this. But hey, that's what happens when you're too nice, too trusting, too stupid to see what's right in front of you. The recording ended. The silence that followed was deafening. Charles bent down slowly, his hands shaking, and stared at the phone. At the date stamp on the recording. 5 days ago. 5 days ago, Victoria had been planning his murder. 5 days ago, while he was thinking about wedding venues and honeymoon destinations, she was talking to her lover about how to kill him and steal everything he had. "How long?" Charles whispered. His voice was so quiet that almost nobody heard him. "How long has this been going on?" He looked up at Judge Sterling. The old man's face was gray. "Answer me," Charles said, louder now. "How long have you known your daughter was a killer?" One of the detectives who had arrived with Samuel picked up the empty velvet box that Victoria had dropped when she fainted. He examined it carefully, running his fingers along the silk lining. Then he lifted the corner of the fabric. His eyes widened. "Detective Greenhills," he said. Tucked beneath the silk lining, carefully hidden in a secret compartment, was the diamond necklace. He held it up for everyone to see. The guests gasped. Victoria had staged the entire theft, the accusation, the lineup, the terror. She had been holding the necklace the whole time, hidden in the very box she claimed was empty. All of it was a setup to punish Sarah for that one moment of eye contact. Samuel stepped forward and nodded to the detective holding the handcuffs. The officer moved toward Victoria's unconscious body. "Victoria Sterling," the detective said formally, pulling out his badge. "You're under arrest for the murder of Emma Rodriguez, conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted theft by deception, and multiple related felonies." He looked at Samuel, who nodded, then continued. "Because of the recording evidence, this is now a federal case. The FBI will be taking over certain aspects of the investigation." Samuel looked at Charles. "The part about bribing a rival company executive, that's corporate espionage. That's a federal crime. The FBI is going to want to talk to you. They're going to want that phone. They're going to want everything." Charles nodded slowly. He felt numb, like he was watching this happen to someone else, like this wasn't his life. Like the woman he loved, the woman he was going to marry, hadn't just been exposed as a murderer and a thief and a monster. The paramedics came and woke Victoria up. She was groggy, confused, and for a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then she saw the handcuffs. She saw Detective Greenhills reading her rights. She saw the guests staring at her. She saw her father turning away, unable to look at her. And she saw Charles, standing there with her phone in his hand, his face blank with shock. "No," Victoria whispered. "No, you don't understand. That recording is taken out of context. Marcus and I were just joking. We were—" But nobody was listening. The detective helped her to her feet and led her toward the elevator. She tried to fight. She tried to pull away, but it was over. 3 years of secrets, 3 years of lies, 3 years of thinking she was untouchable, and it was finally over. The elevator doors closed, and Victoria Sterling, the queen of Manhattan society, disappeared from view. 2 days later, Charles gathered the entire household staff in the living room. All of them. The housekeepers, the cooks, the security guards, everyone who had worked under Victoria's terror. He stood in front of them, and for a long moment, he didn't speak. He just looked at their faces. These people who had suffered, these people who had been afraid, these people he had failed to protect. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice rough. "I'm so sorry. I should have seen what was happening. I should have listened. I should have protected you. Instead, I was so lost in my own grief, so desperate to fill the emptiness my mother left behind, that I let a monster into this house. I let her hurt you. I let her kill Emma Rodriguez, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to make that right." Mrs. Martha started crying. Some of the other staff members looked down at their hands. Charles continued. "Victoria has been charged with murder and related felonies. She's being held without bail while awaiting arraignment. The FBI is investigating the corporate espionage. Her co-conspirator, Marcus Harrington, has already agreed to testify against her. She's going to prison for a very long time." He paused. But punishment isn't enough. Justice isn't just about sending bad people to jail. It's about making sure this never happens again. So I'm making some changes. First, every staff member's salary is being doubled, effective immediately. Second, I'm hiring an independent HR company to manage all household employment. No more direct power dynamics. No more fear. Third, full mental health support for everyone who works here. Therapy, counseling, whatever you need. Then he looked at Sarah. Sarah, you saved my life. You and Mrs. Martha found Emma's diary and called Detective Greenhills together. You stood up to Victoria when nobody else could. And I want to ask you something, not order you, but ask you. My mother started a foundation before she died, the Smith Foundation for Education. It helps kids from low-income families go to college. I want to expand it. I want to create the Emma Rodriguez Memorial Scholarship specifically for children of domestic workers who want to pursue careers in healthcare, and I want you to manage it, if you're willing. Sarah looked at him. Then she looked at Mrs. Martha. Then she spoke. I'll do it, she said, but I have conditions. Full mental health support for all staff, like you said. Independent HR, like you said. And Mrs. Martha gets a seat on the foundation board, not as a token, as a leader, because she knows this world. She knows these families. She knows what they need. Charles smiled. The first real smile in days. Deal, he said. And for the first time in 3 years, the penthouse felt like a home instead of a prison. Across the city, in a cold cell at Rikers Island, Victoria Sterling sat on a metal bench wearing an orange jumpsuit. Her perfect hair was gone. Her perfect makeup was gone. Her perfect life was gone. She stared at the concrete wall and finally understood what it felt like to be powerless. And in a small apartment in Queens, Sarah sat on the couch with her daughter Lily curled up beside her. She was reading Emma's diary one more time. Charles had asked her earlier what made the diary so powerful as evidence, and Sarah had shown him. Look at this, she had said, turning to a page near the back. Emma didn't just write about what Victoria did. She wrote down names of witnesses, exact times, and who signed off on schedule changes. She documented the 12-minute delay with timestamps from the kitchen clock. She listed every person who saw Victoria take her EpiPens. She created a paper trail that showed the pattern and proved Victoria had help covering it up. That's how wealthy abusers get away with it. They rely on no documentation, no witnesses willing to talk, and systems that create plausible deniability. But Emma documented everything. She built a case even after she was gone. Now, sitting with Lily, Sarah opened the diary again. "Who's that, Mama?" Lily asked, pointing at the name on the cover. Sarah smiled softly. "Someone brave," she said. "Someone who knows that the truth, written down, is the most powerful weapon against people who think they're untouchable. Someone whose story is finally going to matter." Click the video on your right to see 3 other cases where domestic workers exposed wealthy abusers, the pattern recognition skills that saved their lives, and the one legal strategy that changes everything when the system protects the powerful. You'll see the warning signs these survivors recognized, the mistakes their abusers made, and the exact moment when documentation became their weapon. This isn't just about one billionaire's fiancée. This is about a system and how people are finally learning to fight back.